Good morning and welcome to the Saturday Science of Mind conversation. I'm Rev Z, your host for today, and I am so excited about the adventure we're going to traverse today. It is chock full of everything that is the creative source of the universe, and that is today we will look at chapter 3, Spirit. Now, before we get started, I'd like to just give us a quick invocation so that we begin with the spirit and have that permeate the space. And so if we take a moment and just go within, because right here right now I know that as we invoke the spirit of the divine, that intelligence that permeates all spaces, that we are ready, willing, and able to open our hearts, our minds, our very souls to the intelligence that creates worlds, the power in the universe that says to a thing, be, and it is. And so we call forth that energy, that understanding, that wisdom right here, right now, so that we can continue this evolutionary journey, this adventure into wholeness, so that we can be all that we were created to be. And that is beyond our wildest dreams. And so with that, I release, I let go, and I know that right now is absolutely so. And so it is. Amen. And so today, we are going to have this conversation about spirit. Now, Ernest Holmes says that spirit is the power of all there is, the intelligence that creates worlds. And so we want to have this conversation. And so I hope that each and every one of you, if you have a question or comment, that you will create this dialogue, because in essence, that's how spirit works. There is a conversation, there is a dialogue between spirit or divine intelligence and the entire universe. And when that conversation is engaged to its finest, we have this flow, this understanding, this automatic action that allows us to really understand and represent the power of all there is. Now, the first thing that we want to look at when we look at spirit is this. What is spirit? Spirit is the animating agent of all things. It is the vital essence, life force energy that is first cause. That is first cause. Now, when we think about that, what do we mean by animating spirit? Because we know that within the understanding of all things, there is a essence to it, an elemental level of it that allows us to really say or understand the components that make it up, the essence of it, as we say. And it is that is the impetus, the first cause, if you will, that causes things to be in motion. Now, when that happens, we are really excited by that idea, because what it really does is it allows us to tap into a universal consciousness, an awareness, an understanding that is uh that acts oftentimes without us knowing it, right? It acts on its own. It has some self-evident content to it. Now, the master teacher Jesus said that God is spirit, so worship it in spirit, or worship in spirit and truth. Now, when we look at that, what that's saying is that we understand that no one has ever seen spirit. So how do we worship something that we can't see? Well, we do that by understanding what it is, and knowing how it works, and being able to operate from this place, this premise that says, I have access to all things. I am able to uh, create a world that allows things that appear to be unseen, but that's only because the manifestation of it, the vehicle of it has not taken form yet. Has not taken form yet. And so when we understand this principle, when we understand this idea of what the world is and how it works, we begin to, as as Jesus, the master teacher, said, we begin to worship God in truth and in spirit and in spirit and in truth, because they'll go to hand in hand and they're interchangeable in the way we explain them, in the way we access them. And so the next point that we want to understand about spirit is that spirit is a synonym for God, is compatible to the wind or air, which is everywhere present and multidimensional. Everywhere present and multidimensional. Now, when you think about what God is, and you think about how God operates, one of the key things that we can gain from spirit in terms of looking at it as air, which is a gas, by the way, it allows us to understand that it can take many forms. It could be a solid, it could be a liquid, it could be a vapor, it could be many different things in terms of its taking shape. So, as the story goes, no one has ever seen wind or air. We've only seen the manifestations of it. And so when we think about it in that terms, it gives us a perfect idea of how to visualize spirit. It's something that is not seen in itself, but we can see the manifestations of it. We can see the manifestations of it. And the beauty of that is that as we begin to know how to see, and we begin to see and trust in uh, 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 the spirit itself, we begin to know that this spirit contains all things, manifest and unmanifest. And once it has a medium to operate in, then it begins to reveal itself. Now, how many of you have ever had that type of experience where you were able to look at something or have an idea of something and see how it became to be? Take your car, for example, or your house. At one point, it was just an idea, an invisible thing, if you will, that was floating in someone's mind. And that energy, that life force, if you will, took on shape. It became your car, your house. And in fact, in God's creation of the world, that same spiritual essence became you, became me. And so when we begin to look at spirit and our relationship to it, and in the terms of new thought, this idea of it being everything, containing all things, that has a center, and the circumference is nowhere to be found. So in essence, the center and the circumference are one. It is just inclusive, massive idea of what spirit is, of what God is. And when we're able to really, really tap into that, we begin to say yes to life. We begin to say yes to life. Now, the next thing that we want to look at, now that we know what God is, if you will, and have some instance or essence of what spirit is, and then the next thing we have to do or get in touch with is, how do we describe spirit? Now, we talked a little bit about description here in giving this definition of what spirit is, but what or how would you describe spirit? And I'll take a moment to see if there's anyone that's listening, if they want to drop a chat in terms of how they would describe spirit. What would you say if someone came to you, had no concept of our teachings, or the idea of spirit or an eternal essence, how would you describe it? What would you say? Or what metaphor or simile would you give to it? Because that's key, right? Our teachings should be our way of life. And so we should be able to, in addition to living it, if someone sees us living this teaching, eventually someone's going to ask, what do you do? What do you know that I think I need to know, so that my manifestations in life, so that my understanding of how I operate in the world and deal with this thing called spirit, how do I describe it? How do I begin to interact with it? Right? And so when we begin to do that, what we can look at, what we can say for sure is this, that it is this mother, father, God principle of unity that speaks to the completeness of life and all things. The completeness of life and all things. That's what we are looking at. That's what we are working to describe and define as we look at life and describing the spirit. So it is this yin and yang, as it is often uh, described. This ability to look at both sides and the unity, the wholeness of it. So when we look at ourselves, we have an external part and we have an internal part. And it is both that internal and external pieces of ourselves, or essence of ourselves, that make us this one individual, this one unity, right? So that's what we would begin, how we would just begin to describe the invisible, if you will, the unseen, the thing that we are not always able to see, but we can discern it by its manifestations. And so that is a key point to always remember, right? That although you may not see it, it is shown in manifestation. It is shown in manifestation. And then once that part is there, then the next thing is it is undivided, having no opposites and no opposition. Okay? Key point there. No opposites and no opposition, meaning there is no counterpart to spirit, right? And we often hear good and evil, or good and bad, or we put things in this yin and yang competitive, oftentimes environment, or explanation. But in essence, spirit, God, the thing itself, has no opposite, and there is no opposition to it. Now, the things that we have labeled as such is our infinite mind trying to understand the infinite, and we begin to try to contrast, if you will, this internal and external parts of life. And so because we don't always put them back together to create a whole, we begin to think that they are in opposition to each other, and that they're in fact two separate entities that are combating for people's minds, for people's times, or for the control of the universe. No such thing. There is one spirit in, through, and around all things that expresses itself in myriad of different ways, and often what we call the opposition, or the opposite of a thing, is really a point on a scale of temp. We talk about hot and cold, and we often put them in contrast to each other. But what we really have is one thing called temperature. And temperature has a variance, a movement. And at one end of that spectrum, we call it hot, and the other end of that spectrum, we call it cold. But never are they in competition with each other. It is just a movement of the energy, of the spirit, if you will. The thing itself that causes us to label one part of that spectrum hot and the other part cold. Now, when we can understand that, we step into a place where uh, where we can navigate the world differently. Because automatically in our minds, in our very existence, when we look at something in opposition, and quantum physics and the finer points of human anatomy have now shown this, that every thought that we have, every situation, every encounter with something else causes an effect physically, mentally, and emotionally, which ultimately affects our spirit, that aspect, or that divine spark of the eternal spirit that is within each and every one of us. And so when we begin to understand this, when we can move away from this contrasting uh, idea of competition and look at the contrasting aspects of life as the wholeness of all things, and begins to allow us to look at them more intricately, we see that there is no battle, there is no opposition, there is no contention between two things. It is a continual flow of life, a continual aspect of the thing itself that allows itself to be revealed, to be manifested. And when that happens, we begin to understand this whole idea of how can we describe it. And apologize for this slide; it got a little out of hand once I converted it. But the other part of it is changeless in its essence. It is changeless in its essence. So that means if you take water and you boil it and it becomes steam, the essence of the water is the same in the steam. It's just manifested in a different way. If I take that water and freeze it and it becomes ice, it's the same essence, but it's been taking on another form. So we have solid, we have a gas or steam, we have a liquid that's flowing, all the same essence, but its manifestation, depending on the environment that it finds itself in, it begins to take shape and form differently to cooperate, if you will, or to move uh, easily and effortlessly within that environment. Now apply that to yourself. Apply when in your life does the eternal spirit seeks to ask the question of you: should you be a solid in this moment, or should you be a gas in this moment, or should you be a liquid in this moment? Because that's how the spirit begins to not only reveal itself to us, but to teach us how to operate in this space that we call life. How to operate in this space we call life. Now I'm going to take a pause right there. I've been going for a minute, and we put out a lot of concepts and things. So if anyone has a question or comment, please feel free to jump in, drop it in, and we will entertain it with everyone that's here. And if not, we'll keep moving, because when we talk about spirit, we know it's everywhere present. So there's always a continuing story to be told. Continuing story to be told. So if that's the case, let's move on. So now that we understand what spirit is and we can kind of describe it, and if you notice that these things just continually flow into one another, the next thing is, you know, how do we look at spirit in action? Right? Spirit in action. Now, the action of spirit is creative, and it uses various mediums to express itself. There are no limits in the way creativity can be displayed. All of the seen and unseen world is the manifestation of spirit in action, and the medium from which it operates is law, the agent or means by which something is done or conveyed. The way something is done or conveyed. Now, the question here, I think one of the questions, I mean, there are many questions, right? But one of the questions is, how is spirit active in your life? How are you uh, uh, interpreting and interacting with this invisible thing? We have all this stuff we call life, right? But what does that really mean? Is life just the eating and breathing and procreating that we see, or is life the interaction between one thing and another? How is the spirit? What is the medium, as it says here? What is the medium that we are dealing with, or are we expressing through when we look at life? Very good thing to ponder, to contemplate. Contemplation is one of these spiritual practices that really allows us to delve deep into a thing. We have these spiritual practices. We have prayer, which is the communication to the divine spirit. We have meditation, which is the receiving of the answer to the prayer. In some ways that we ask and we meditate and we receive an answer. But the idea of a practice of contemplation gives us a both and, if you will, because it allows us to ask questions and to be still and see if we can find an answer or relevance to what we have asked. And then we continue with the next question. And so we get this internal, external dialogue of what a thing is, how it works. When I say something is seen and unseen, what does that really mean? Right? Because you have an idea that is unseen, but at some point that idea becomes manifest and it is now seen. What is the true essence of it? Is it the thing seen or the thing that was the impetus for it to be created and manifested and seen? So here is the crux of what we're dealing with here when we begin to deal with life. When we begin to deal with this idea of how do we understand spirit, or how do we understand the created thing itself, as Dr. Holmes would call it, the thing itself, which is a perfect name because we often get caught up in these different titles of spirit and God and eternal essence and universal consciousness, right? But Dr. Holmes was clever enough, if you will, to say the thing itself. So no matter what you do, what label you put on it, we're talking about the thing itself. So we know that any label can fit in a given situation, just like we understand manifestation of a liquid or water to be liquid or fluid, a solid, a gas in terms of steam, right? You look at wind. Wind, no one ever seen wind. You see the effects of wind, but wind has the power to create its own environment. So wind can start fires. You can start a fire from wind if it's blowing and there's friction and there's the right elements. It creates something other than itself, if you will, or it manifests itself in a whole different way, right? Which we also often we talk about transformation and transmutation, right? This is the ability of what spirit can do. This is the thing itself that manifests in a myriad of different ways and allows us to experience this existence, this thing called life, in an infinite number of ways, which is why we are often we've often heard the term about the unity of spirit, right? Because all these different parts come together to create this whole. To create this whole. Now, From there, we move into this idea of spirit being this, uh, you know, I would say law, right? I was struggling there for a minute because the moment we try to put it into a law, we begin to step into some real deep homework. Let's put it that way. There's some deep homework that takes place because in this place, what is the law of spirit? It is a rule, a set of rules that operate within a system of wholeness. Within a system of wholeness. So now we're back to this idea of wholeness, right? Then we want to know from that standpoint, it is also a rule or a set of rules that operate within a system of wholeness. I got that twice because I wanted to emphasize it, right? Because we look at this whole thing, we look at a law in our teachings of this, that thoughts and belief are directly influenced by one another's, right? Thoughts and beliefs. And so we come up with laws such as the law of correspondence or the law of attraction, which says that there's a relationship in life. There's a place in life where we go back and forth that we need to understand how they operate. We need to understand what they do together. And it is a timeless component, right? It goes throughout time. The ability and the rules of making fire 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, are the exact same as the rules are today. The same rules apply. That is a spiritual law. That is a universal law that has been consistent. But because spirit can manifest in different ways, the right conditions, the right pieces, if you will, have to be present for that to take place. And so we also understand that it is the mean of operation, a way of of looking and creating that is consistent. It is a law, it is repeatable, it is measurable, it is definable. And when we look at God, the spirit, we understand that these laws apply universally. Now, they may appear to be a little different based on the medium that it's operating through, but the principle or the law of it remains the same. For example, we have the law of electricity, if you will, right? But electricity can be generated from hydro, thermal, uh, um, fossil, solar, right? The same thing, energy is created by different elements or different pieces coming together to hold that principle true, to establish that law as a consistent. And so here's what we know that spirit is this unseen but manifestable thing in life, that it has certain rules, it has certain ways of operating, and that because of the environment that it finds itself in, it's able to manifest in a myriad of different ways that allows us to operate wholly, unified, and no matter what situation we find ourselves in. Now, if we put that in the form of life, that deals with whether we're dealing with a so-called fearful situation or a joyous situation or an investigative situation, doesn't matter. The spirit of the divine will adapt itself to the environment that it finds itself in and allows it to be revealed in its wholeness. So these ideas of lack or fear or anything that we've labeled as negative, let's begin to look at them in a way of the evolutionary manifestation to bring us to wholeness. Because when we feel this different tensions, we're operating from a space of not understanding that spirit operates in wholeness and that it needs to understand the contrast, which will give it an indication of the environment that it is in so it knows how to manifest in wholeness. You don't want to get stuck in any one of those. You want to be able to merge them into wholeness. And when that happens, life is grand. Life is glorious. Life is exactly what we expect it to be at our heart, at our core. And it is exactly what will be manifested in the way you look at life, in the way you uphold everything that you do. And so now the last thing that we want to look at here as we begin to wrap this up is the principle of spirit, right? The essence of spirit, if you will. So there's four things that I think capsulizes this, and we've talked about all of this because there's no way to talk about the whole in parts. They will begin to fold over into the other thing or the other side. But it is an invisible essence of all things. Invisible essence of all things. And it is transcendent life force and energy. It is a transcendent life force and energy. That transcendent means it can operate on multiple levels. It could be here, but transcend that and show itself and manifest itself in another level. So when that happens, we begin to understand that we, as multidimensional beings, we begin to see that life is this multifaceted, this intricate kaleidoscope that as we move and traverse through the space, it creates according to the conditions it finds itself in, and those life force energies and all of that operating together transforms and transmutes and transcends at the various levels of life. We understand that as a principle, spirit is seen and known and expressed through manifestation. That's how we see it. That's how we can categorize it, if you will, as a thing itself, right? It manifests itself as something seen. And the last thing is, it operates in a field of absolute intelligence. It operates in a field of absolute intelligence, which gives us the understanding that no matter where we find ourselves, no matter what situation we think we are dealing with, or we find ourselves actually dealing with, that there is a universal intelligence, the spirit, that is operating in that field, in that environment that allows us to transform it, transmute it, or we can transcend it. Now, those are keys to the successful way of life, of using this thing called spirit or the thing itself. And so I hope and I trust that uh, if you listen to this, go back and listen again. I think you know it gives us an opportunity to reflect on this thing called life. What we do with it, what it does with us, right? Because there is this you know, Linda says this: I had to move away from the Christian teaching I grew up with. They define God and spirit as two different and separate things. And this is what we want to uh, embody in our teachings, that is not two separate things. It is one thing that manifests itself in a myriad of different ways. And because we see it operating and doing something in one environment and not in another, does not mean or does not indicate that it is a separate thing. It is a one thing that is able to adjust to the environment that it finds itself in. Imagine you're in physical form and you're trying to eat invisible food, or the idea of food or the word food, right? Won't work. So this is an example of how we have to begin to operate in in a space that is multidimensional and multi-layered, and there is intelligence at each level that is connective, that is unified, that serves as one whole. And so right now, I'll just take a pause and see if there's anything that is wanting to be said right now, anything that needs to be said right now, any question that needs to be answered as we continue this exploration in the Science of Mind textbook. This week we're working with chapter 3, the spirit, the essence of all things, that universal intelligence that allows us to move and have our being, something that we want to understand and implement in our lives, the understanding of it, the action of it, the integration and relationship with it in everything we do. Because when we're able to do that, we begin to create this world, as we love to say here on New Thought Media Network, that works for all the elements, the animals, the plants, the humans, the universe itself, right? When we understand that there is a wholeness of it, there's a oneness of it, we begin to have a different relationship with spirit, a different interaction with spirit, and we begin to live the life that we were created to be or created to have. And that is a life full of exploration, of understanding, of communication, of discovery of who and what this whole universe is made of, and the relationship between each and every part of it. So I trust that there's been something in this short exploration of spirit that if nothing else has caused you to have a thought that says, I agree with that or I don't agree with that. Now I got to go find out why I don't. Or even if you agree, why do I agree? That's what these conversations are about. Is we have to begin to engage in this idea of a contemplative relationship with reality so that we begin a conversation based on the desire to create a unified world that works for all. And so if there's no more questions or there's no statements that anyone has at this point, um, I look forward to our next encounter, our next efforts of being seen together in this dynamic conversation, this understanding of life itself. And so I would like to say we are moving in a world that is filled with wonder, that allows us to create and be whatever and whoever we want to be. And with that, I bid you a wonderful weekend and a great week ahead as we explore the science of mind in its wholeness. And so it is. Thank you.